Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty, and today we're not talking travel at all. But one of my regular co-hosts on the podcast, the Sarah Enigma, is joining me today because it is Chronic Illness Awareness Month. And as many of you know, we've talked about it a number of times on the show. Sarah deals with chronic illness. Also, my wife, Courtney, deals with chronic illness. So I thought it would be really important to take a day and not talk about theme parks and actually talk about chronic illness. Try to make the world a better place like we do every once in a while. And Sarah, first of all, I want you to tell everybody about your project, your business, Sava Wellness, and what you are trying to do with your experience dealing with chronic illness and how you are trying to help others get through those initial stages.
Yeah, thanks. I started a business called Sava Wellness, and for me, it's a way to let people know that they're not alone. When I was going through my journey, it was very hard to not have anybody to talk to. So, Sava Wellness is a wellness business where you can book in appointments with me, and I can talk to you about anything from not knowing what your diagnosis means to I don't know how to keep track of all my medications, how to advocate for yourself, or just to have someone who's gone through it and knows what's going on to talk to. And then the awareness piece of my business, I'm going to talk with businesses and they can hire me for speaking engagements to just talk about what chronic illness and disabilities are and how to make the world a better and more inclusive place for people with invisible disabilities.
That is so important. I'm so impressed with what you have been doing and what you have already accomplished in the first few months of this business. But I want to talk about that advocating statement that you made, because I think that is a big part of this. Recently, I've seen a tweet going around the internet that people have been sharing that says, young adults, I want you to realize, like, you can leave. And that means if you're at a doctor's appointment and the doctor, for whatever reason, is not clicking with you, you can just stand up and walk out of that appointment. Now, that's not necessarily advocating for that, saying that's the best course of action. But what that is saying is when you're in a doctor's appointment, when it's just not clicking, you can take control of those situations. You can advocate for yourself. I know my wife, Courtney, as I mentioned earlier, deals with chronic illness. It took her a long time to get used to that. And it took you a long time to get used to that. So why don't you talk a little bit about advocating for yourself and how you learned to do it when you were basically just self-taught?
Yeah, advocating is really hard to learn, I think, especially because as we've all been taught, doctors' knowledge is gold. So when they say something, that's what it's supposed to be, right? So it's really hard to then be like, well, that's not right, or I'm sure I have this symptom. That can't be true, or can you just please do this test? I'm sure it's this. And that is very hard to do. And I think for me, I learned particularly out of just frustration and knowing that I wasn't getting the care that I needed. And I knew that if I could just find someone who believed me, I would get the care I needed. So advocacy is not only, yeah, standing up and leaving, it's researching your symptoms, not not to the point where everything, you look up anything, it says you have cancer. That's not what I mean. Like going on Mayo Clinic, looking at the UK has some great NHS resources that you can also look at. So researching kind of what your symptoms are and going in prepared, but also researching different doctors because, like you said, there are lots of doctors out there. It does get hard when you get more specialized because there might be the only one doctor in your area. But then advocating for yourself can be more like, no, I don't want to do that treatment. Yes, I do want this test. Can you please look at this for me? So it is standing up for yourself, and it does take courage and practice. There's still some times where I get out of the appointment and I go, oh man, I really want to ask about this. Or, oh, she made me really upset and I just shut down. And sometimes that still happens to me, but it's a learning process, and the more you do it, the easier it does get. And I do find too that to have someone come along with you, or to at least be in your corner all the time, like helping you research, driving you to appointments, or even coming in an appointment with you, can be very helpful. Because if you have some chronic diseases like I do that causes brain fog, it can be very difficult to advocate for yourself on bad days because you just can't think about it. So, advocating for yourself is also knowing your boundaries and your limits, and taking steps like bringing someone along with you so that they're not an impedance. Yeah.
So I know a lot of times when I talk about your chronic illness, whether it be on the podcast or when I'm just trying to, describe you to one of my other friends or something like that, I say Sarah is dealing with chronic illness. Is that the right terminology? Like, I find I'm learning a lot from Courtney going through this and becoming friends with you over the last 2 years. I'm trying to find ways to say, like, I don't want to say you're suffering with chronic illness, or, you have chronic illness. I don't want to define you by it, but I want to acknowledge that it is something there. So, what are some pieces of terminology that you use to describe yourself as somebody who has chronic illness that would make it easier to have these conversations?
Yeah. So I think my first piece of advice would be, when you have someone with chronic illness or disabilities, just ask them. Ask them what terms they like to use the best. But for example, I don't mind being called a person with chronic illness, chronically ill, a person with disabilities, disabled. I often use invisibly disabled, or I have invisible disabilities as well. So for me, it's quite flexible. I really don't mind. And I don't, even if someone says, oh, you have chronic illness, or I say, I have chronic illness, I still don't define myself by that. But it's just sometimes easier for me to remember than to say a person with disabilities or chronic illness. But really, I've had people from all over the place say, oh, I don't like being called disabled. Oh, I don't like being called chronically ill. Or they really don't like putting that first. So to put a person with chronic illness is very important. And some people like to just say, I have insert disease instead of chronically ill as well. So really ask the person. For me, I'm pretty flexible with what I like to use.
And that sort of leads right into my next question. Do you have a diagnosis for your symptoms? And I already know this one, and I'm asking for our listeners, so I do know it. It's a pretty extensive list, but if you just want to share what makes you comfortable, like, that's perfectly fine.
I have Lyme disease, and lots of its co-infections, including Babesia, Bartonella, Epstein-Barr virus. And because Lyme disease attacks your immune system, I also now have quite a number, like you said, of chronic illnesses that go with it. And one of the main ones is chronic fatigue.
So I've talked about this a few times as well, that I was very late in my life compared to other people diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. And it ended up completely changing my life because so many things that I didn't understand, or times that I dealt with misdiagnoses or something like that, all of a sudden now I can actually work on myself because I know what's happening. Did you find that when you would start to get more accurate diagnoses yourself, that really helped you move from one stage of struggling to maybe a stage of surviving?
Yeah, mine was very interesting because it was very multi-layered. Lyme disease can really hide. And in I live in Canada, and in Canada, it's sometimes very hard to detect Lyme disease. If you don't get the test within 2 weeks of being bitten by the tick or whatever is carrying the Lyme disease, the test will come back negative. And unfortunately, 30% of people who have Lyme disease don't get the bullseye rash. I did not get the bullseye rash, so no one knew what was going on. So when I got tested, they said, no, you don't have Lyme disease. And that was 9 years ago. And then I had to fight to find a doctor that would help me with the symptoms that weren't apparently Lyme disease. And because it was treated, because it was untreated for so long, I kept getting more diagnoses and more chronic illnesses. And so every time I got a diagnosis, it was kind of like peeling back a layer. Like I'd get relief for a little bit and I'd be like, oh, thank goodness I have this. And then I get sick again and be like, well, why am I still not better? So we go deeper and deeper and deeper until finally we had to send my blood work to Germany. And Germany is the Lyme disease specialist in blood work in the world. And they finally diagnosed I had Lyme disease. Now, that has been helpful for me, and we've been able to do some courses of treatment. However, because it took about, I would say, 5 years to finally get that diagnosis, I now have chronic Lyme disease, and there's nothing that can be really done because antibiotics won't work anymore. I tried them, they did not work. So I think, yes, it definitely helps to have a direction when you have a diagnosis. I just wish that, and part of my business is to bring advocacy, is that patients can be believed more. Like my mom was the one that told my doctor to get tested for Lyme disease. My mom was right 9 years ago. It just, the test didn't show it. So I think if we just believe people more and do the tests they need, we can get better care, and diagnoses will be even more relieving for the patients because there actually will be a direction and not necessarily a cure, but maybe a better reduction of symptoms.
And one of my favorite things about the way you handle your chronic illness is that you are very, very open. And I know that that is something that people need when they're in this situation. They need to feel that they can be open. They need to have somebody, maybe you don't want to tell your friends when you don't know what's going on. You don't want to tell them yet because you don't know what's happening. So having somebody who's sort of been there and knows what it's like to deal with this. Courtney goes to the doctor a lot and comes back to me frustrated because she's not getting the help that she needs. She's trying to advocate for herself, and maybe the doctor thinks it's this and she's like, but I know it's not this, or whatever the hip diagnosis is that month. They're always trying to label everything as that. And I think that if I didn't know you and I didn't have that background of knowing that this is normal, I could see thinking that what Courtney was telling me, she wasn't necessarily being, I mean, I don't think my wife's lying to me or anything, but it would seem to me like she was being difficult. Whereas a person who's just dealing with these things for the first time, when you're telling your family, they might think you're being difficult. They might think you're the one who's not accepting whatever diagnosis the doctor is trying to give you. So having somebody like you who can say, no, this is very common. A lot of times people have to push through this, I think can be a big benefit to people. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think so. I really struggled without having support that I could talk to besides my family. I had great support in my family, but it's always nice to talk to someone outside it who's gone through it. And I definitely found too that being younger and having all these diseases that you shouldn't have when you're younger is very hard as well because I go to a support group and it'd be all people over 60. And it was like, oh, like we're in totally different life stages. Like it would be so nice to talk to someone who understands. And I think what you were saying about the doctors and telling your family too, what's so hard is chronic diseases, they're so complex. They don't just like you don't just bump your arm and get a bruise and it goes away. It's like your Lyme disease attacks your brain, it attacks your nervous system, it attacks your joints, right? So if you have nervous system symptoms that day, maybe they think you have some sort of I've been told that I had an anxiety disorder. And I was like, no, but that doesn't account for the joint pain as well, right? So I think the fluctuating symptomology of chronic illnesses can make it really hard to talk to doctors and families as well, because your family members could be like, or friends could be like, but you didn't have that symptom 3 days ago. And you're like, yeah, I know, but now I have it today. And it still means that yeah, maybe I don't have arthritis because of the joint pain. Maybe I do have Lyme disease because now I have neurological symptoms. So it can be very hard that way if doctors don't look at your whole body and your whole symptomology. You can really get pushed into something that doesn't describe everything or your fluctuations. And it's the fluctuations that are so frustrating.
We talk a lot about the theme parks. That's what we do most of the time when I have you on the channel. And I think one of the things that was hard for me when dealing with my wife, Courtney, having chronic illness is a little different than, say, how having a friend like you who has chronic illness. I've known you the entire time that we've had our friendship as somebody with chronic illness.
Mhm.
With my wife, Courtney, I've known her before she was diagnosed with chronic illness, before she was dealing with some of these problems. So I'm used to a Courtney who can do more things. I'm used to Courtney being able to show up to the theme park at rope drop and stay until fireworks. And now she can't do that. And I think that's a hard thing for me, not that I don't have compassion or empathy for her, but you've already seen somebody be able to do something. And it's hard to always think, no, she really can't today. Or maybe she can do it on Tuesday, but she can't do it on Saturday. And that's something that me being your friend has helped me sort of understand those things with Courtney. But how would you say that was for people who knew you before the Lyme disease, that they saw you? I mean, you were a great student, you were on your way to becoming a doctor, and you basically succeeded at everything you tried. I mean, I joked the other day when you were talking with some of my friends, like you were a high school basketball player. Like, and now you have these different limitations. How do you sort of explain those things to the people who were in your life beforehand?
Mhm. I think the main thing is that there's a lot of grieving involved for yourself as a person with the chronic illness. You grieve the future you thought you were going to have, you grieve the body you used to have or wish you had. And that comes and goes. Sometimes you're like all grieving, you do fine, and other days it smacks you in the face. And I think your very close family members and friends also have to go through that process to be like, oh yeah, like we used to hike in the mountains and now we can't anymore. And I think I was very lucky with my family because I've talked a little bit about it before, but my mom is also disabled and she kind of had the same thing. She was very active, very full of life, and one day she was out and she's had disabilities for probably 15 years, over 15 years now. So for my family, it was very easy for them. Like still hard because it's hard when your family member's struggling. But it was very easy when I started calling myself disabled. They're both like, "Yep." So my mom and my sister are very We're all very connected that way, but I know that I have a very unique support system because of that. Sadly, most people, like I experienced, is you lose a lot of friends. You truly do. I don't have any friends from high school or university anymore. And that's just, it's not because hopefully I'm unlikable or anything. It's just because when they continue to ask you to do things and you continue to have to say no, or I can't do that anymore, it's, they just disappear. Or if you ask, or if you're too honest with them, which I struggle with because I like being honest with people. If you're honest every day that you're having a bad day, people just stop asking and they just ghost you, right? So that's very hard. So with chronic illness, when you're later in life, you really do find out who your true friends and support system really are. And those are the people that you can sit down with and be like, look, this is what I have. These are my symptoms. If you want more information, you can look at this article on the Mayo Clinic, or you can ask me any questions you want. I think as someone asking someone with chronic illness or disabilities, you need to balance asking questions and also doing your own research, because sometimes it can be overwhelming to describe the same thing over and over and over again. It really depends on the person. But I think as a family member or friend, you just need to be patient. You need to be really patient and there for them while they're figuring stuff out. Because, like we already talked about, it can be years until you figure out what's going on. And some days you can barely get out of bed, and some days you can go for a walk around the mall. So you just have to be patient, meet them where they're at, and yeah, do some own grieving yourself. To think about how they were before and how they're not going to be now, and how you can still fit them into your life and you into theirs and still have a meaningful connection. I think it takes some soul searching on both parties, but it really can work. Like we've been friends all through this, and it you can have great friendships and great support. It just sometimes means asking different questions, or asking questions like, can I help you? And truly meaning it. That is a huge thing. If you can ask something about, can I help you with something? Truly mean it when they say, oh, can you come do my laundry? Be ready to go do their laundry for them, right? Like, yeah, I don't know if that kind of answered your question, but I think it does take a lot of grieving and just accepting people where they're at.
So somebody just getting a fresh diagnosis and they're starting to deal with some of these things, and you've gone through it, and we've talked about it in our personal lives before, some of the things that really, really hurt when that happened. So somebody who's now going through them for the first time, you sort of have that firsthand experience, because you are going to end up finding people who are going to fit you into their lives.
Mhm.
You're going to find people who will make time, who don't have to go to the bar every night to hang out. I mean, that's probably something where you are in a unique position because you were dealing with this in your 20s, when friendships are not as deep and are maybe more dependent on activities like going out and having a good time. Whereas once some people in the friend group have families and other people, it's a little easier to have those friendships that are not requiring you to go out all the time. But I don't want to get too far off on a tangent. When somebody is dealing with this for the first time, how do you think you can step in and help? Because you're going to want to save all those friendships. You're going to want to prevent the hurt that you experienced, but you're also smart enough to know that you're not going to be able to do that. So, how do you deal with people when you start to hear those similar stories to the ones that you've had in your journey?
Hmm. I think, well, that's a hard one. I think there will be hurt. I think you'll be able to save some, but not all of them. And I think someone told me, and it doesn't sound the nicest, but it has helped me. Someone told me if they leave you when you're not doing well, they weren't good friends anyways. So that has helped me. It doesn't always help the hurt, but it's helped me with that. I think really communication is the biggest thing, is get them on the phone, get them to come over to your house, even if you have to lay on the couch. Like, have a Zoom chat with your friends and be like, look, this is what's happening to me. I'm scared. This is what's happening to me. I don't know what tomorrow's going to look like. And tell them that your life is changing and it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you don't want to come. It's not your fault that you have to cancel last minute. And just tell them that this might happen. And then you can have a good conversation about it. And maybe the next day they'll call you up again and be like, hey, I have more questions. Maybe they won't. And that's just unfortunately how it works. But I think if they're a great enough friend and a good enough person, if you're really honest with them and have good communication, I think you'll be just fine. That's what I found anyways.
I definitely think it makes sense that the people who are there for more than just, going out and having a good time, which is fine. And there are people in your life who fill that function. And it doesn't mean that they're bad people if that's the only function that they fill in your life. But there come times where you need somebody who's maybe a little deeper. And there are going to be times, getting back to Sava Wellness, where maybe you haven't found those people yet. So having somebody like Sarah who has gone through those situations, and you're gonna find them. Like, I don't think you're gonna need Sarah for the rest of your life. Um, but to have those situations where you don't know who you can trust, or you're trying to navigate these situations. Maybe you just don't want to tell everybody everything. Maybe you don't want to feel like a burden to your friends because you're telling the same story, you're describing the same symptoms over and over and over again. And maybe you don't want to be viewed in that way yet by certain people. That's perfectly fine. And I think that's part of the service that Sarah provides at Sava Wellness. So, how has your experience of the world changed since your symptoms started? This is a question that you like to ask people when you interview them, but I think that your answer is going to be very interesting because you have a much greater hold on this. You've dealt with it for a long time. You've thought about it a lot. You've put in a lot of the research. So, how have you noticed that your world has changed?
Yeah, it has changed quite a lot. It has changed me personally. I find that I'm more resilient now, and I tend to listen more. I found that I've had to put in a lot more preparation to go out into society, if that means researching the walking trails beforehand so I know how far it is if there's benches, or if we're going to a restaurant with someone, researching to see if they have foods that match my restrictions. Or when we go on vacation, is it a vacation that's not too far by flight? Or is there, like emergency rooms close? Like sometimes you have to think about that. And I never had to think about that before, but like I can never go to some middle of the ocean island anymore, right? Because you just never know. I think I've realized that the world does. Hmm, I lost my train of thought. Hello, everybody. This is brain fog. Um,
We both love the television show MASH. And I'm going to bring up an episode right now, and it's going to relate. People will understand. So, the nurses needed help with their furnace, and they grabbed Hawkeye to come over and try to fix their furnace. The furnace exploded in Hawkeye's face. And for a period of the episode, he didn't know if he was going to be blind for the rest of his life. Spoiler alert, he wasn't blind for the rest of his life, but he started to try to deal over this week that his eyes were healing with the thought that he might be blind for the rest of his life and how he would deal with that. And he was a surgeon, and that was going to be something that he wouldn't be able to do anymore if he was blind. But he started to see things that he was able to do while blind that maybe he did better than he did before. Like, you talk about being a better listener. Now that you're dealing with chronic illness, he became a better listener. And I want to know is, yes, it is the worst thing to say that this happened for a reason, or look on the bright side, you now have this. But I truly want to ask where you think you have become a better person because you have dealt with this. This is not saying that we're happy it happened. This is not saying that it's a good thing. Like, but there are areas in your life where you are now a better person, I have to believe, because you've dealt with this.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I've always been a content person, but I've become even more content. And little things make me happy. Like, my sister will pull a funny face when I'm having a bad day, and I will lose it. Like, I will laugh so hard. And it's because it's the little things. It's the relationships that I love, and the people I love that I keep close and I cultivate. It's going outside and sitting on the deck when I have a good day and listening to the birds outside. It's it's changing what I viewed my future. Like you said, I was on the stream to become a doctor, and because I've always wanted to help people, and it shattered my dreams having this chronic illness. And I pivoted a couple times in different types of healthcare, and none of them worked because of my chronic illness. And I thought, well, I just want to help people. Like, that's all I want to do. And I never would have got to this spot of helping people specifically with chronic illnesses and disabilities if this hadn't happened. And if we hadn't even had a an increase in technology, like to be able to do this. You are in Florida, I am in Alberta, like that we can talk about this and I can help people, not just in my little town. That's not a little town, my big city of Calgary, right? Like, there's not that many people that you could help, but to be able to spread help around the world is kind of overwhelming and amazing that we can do that nowadays. So I think it's really made me think about how to create a life that still makes you content and still makes you happy and still is fulfilling, but to be able to do it in a way that I never thought that was going to be. Like, I really had to train myself to not be like, I have to do 8,000 things on my list today to be productive, or I'm not worthy, I'm not enough. And Rick and I have talked about this because I do still struggle with this, but my lists have become from 8,000 down to maybe five. So to really just to teach yourself to slow down, and that it's okay to listen, it's okay to love, and it's okay to have self-compassion. That's a huge one. I've really been working on that as well. So that has changed my worldview a lot that way too, for the good. And there is, of course, some things that are hard. Like, you realize a lot of the world can be ableist. That the world demands productivity, and that can be a very hard thing to get over because when you're lying on the couch all day because you can't move, you feel like you're not enough, that you can't be productive. But you have to think, well, I talked to my friend today, I gave my mom a hug, I watered the plants for the birds. That's all wonderful, productive, loving, caring things that need to be done. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but I think it's important to know that even though you can't be what you wanted to be, or you can't do what other people can, do what you can, and that's enough.
I find that this might be getting off on a little bit of a tangent for everybody, not just people living with chronic illness. But I know, as somebody who was an athlete, and then I suffered a knee injury, like a really bad knee injury. Like, there are some days where I am still talking to Sarah and she's like, "How are you doing?" And I'm like, "I can't stand up because my knees hurt too bad today." And you talk about, like, oh, I had these dreams, and Sarah says, before I got Lyme disease, I wanted to become a doctor. And people might be like, yeah, sure, you were going to be a doctor, whatever. And I might talk to somebody and say, oh, like, I wanted to play, professional baseball. Like, that was my dream my whole life. And people would be like, yeah, sure, like, you were that good, I'm sure. And because you never got to get to the point where you get that external validation, I feel sometimes you just want to be like, no, I swear, like, I was really good at this thing, or I really was smart enough to become a doctor. Like, I was on that path before this thing happened, because we deal so much in external validation as a society. We want that degree or that piece of paper that says, yes, we're this thing. And it can be all aspects of life. It
Mhm.
can be podcast views. It can be, um, like you said, like, trying to be okay doing three things in a day that maybe other people wouldn't consider big accomplishments, but to you, they are big accomplishments. And maybe you did the laundry and put away the laundry, and that made your mother's life just a little bit easier. It made your sister's life just a little bit easier. And you can still do those things, and to not just completely shut down and not do anything takes a lot of energy and a lot of courage.
Yeah, I think it does. And when you're first diagnosed and you don't know what's going on, getting out of bed is enough. Putting on clothes is enough. Like I've had to go through all parts of that from being able to do eight things to being able to do none things, to be able to do nothing, right? So it just, yeah, try not to let, I don't know what you said, outside.
External factors, right?
Try
External.
not to let external factors value your worth, because every day is different.
So, which of your symptoms do you find to be the most debilitating, and why?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. I have a couple annoying ones.
Wrote that one. That's one that you ask people, so you should
I,
get credit for it.
yeah. My most debilitating actually is the fatigue. I'm not using it as a euphemism when I say I can't get out of bed. Like some days I lay in bed and be like, I am too tired to get out of bed. It's the fatigue. If the fatigue would go away, like the brain fog would go away, I would rather stand the pain and the other symptoms like the itch and the stomach problems. And I think that's what's crazy, is because I think a lot of people will look at people and say, oh, you have chronic pain or you have Lyme disease that's attacking your joints. I'm sure you want that to go away. I'm like, well, yes. But if I could only choose one thing, it'd be the fatigue. Because when you're tired, and like not just tired, like so exhausted, it's hard to move your arms because your muscles feel like they're 800 pounds. And walking down the stairs, you have to clutch the railing because not only are your muscles fatigued, but your brain works so much slower that sometimes it can be scary. Like I've done things where like I'm putting the dishes away and I leave the cupboard door open and I forget. And then I will turn around and it will be right here and I've almost smacked my face in it. And the amount of times I go, oh, that was close. And that's not because unintelligent. It's just because my brain fog is compounded with the fatigue. So if the fatigue could go away, you could actually get stuff done. And even if I couldn't get stuff done, just to be able to have the words come to my mouth that I'm actually thinking, and to be able to do a simple calculation with math with that, instead of thinking, okay, wait, it's this, and then wait, no, what? And like having to go back. It just, the fatigue is the worst. So that would be my number one debilitating.
So one of the reasons that I'm happy that part of Sava Wellness is you speaking to organizations and businesses about this is because, yes, it is very, very important for people who are just suddenly dealing with a chronic illness to find a way to handle that in their lives. But I do think for the people in their lives who really do want to put forth the effort to stay in them and be a part of their lives, when you talk about chronic fatigue, and this is something that, like, we've had these conversations where we'll be talking and just all of a sudden Sarah is like, I gotta go, like I just can't anymore. And you have to, as a friend of somebody with chronic illness, as a coworker of somebody with chronic illness, as a spouse of somebody with chronic illness, you have to understand that they could just, for lack of a better term, have to shut down just on a dime, because the fatigue can really creep up on you. I've noticed that as we have had our friendship, where you can be talking about something and it's just got to be like, yeah, we'll figure it out tomorrow because I got to go. And you have to be strong enough as a person in their lives to go, that's not about me. I didn't do anything wrong. Like, this is this is something that you just have to accept, because the more you make it about you, then you're putting pressure on the other person too, and that's not fair. Can you describe what a bad day symptom wise looks like for you?
Hmm. Um, Bad days tend to be couch days for me. So usually I can make it downstairs to the couch. Um, Crippling fatigue, um, joint pain in all the joints, extreme nausea, sometimes light and noise sensitivity. More often than not, noise. It used to be light, but now noise. Um, Noise can make you very tired, and that it contributes to my chronic fatigue as well. It's usually the days where it's too tiring to hold up a book, and if you know me, I love reading. So I'm just trying to describe, like, it's just, you just feel like you want to curl in a ball, and you literally can't move, and that's usually when it's TV time, because you can just lay there and glaze out and just be. And that's bad days. And sometimes bad days comes with mental. I think everyone with chronic illness struggles at some points with bad mental days as well. Um, but yeah, that's when you need a good support system who can feed you. Because on bad days, I don't feel like making food. Not that I don't feel, I can't make food. So having good support systems to realize you're having a bad day is very important. And yeah, you just usually on bad days, you hope you go to sleep and the next morning's a little bit better.
There's a bunch of things from that statement that I want to sort of address. And one of them was saying you don't feel like you can make food, and then having to stop yourself and saying, like, you can't make food. And I notice that a lot in your conversations, where you will try to sort of sugarcoat it and make it sound like you can do these things. And every once in a while, you have to just stop and say, no, I can't. Like, I can't do it. I need this help. And that is a big thing. It's probably a big adjustment to not always try to make it seem like you are Superman and you can do everything when you're dealing with these symptoms. Another thing is, I have had conversations with you on days where you have said, like, I can't believe I got out of bed and went downstairs. Like, you were so proud of yourself for doing it. And that is a big step. And that's something that you need to celebrate when you are having these problems. Because if you don't celebrate the small victories, you're never going to get to the big victories. One of the greatest days of our friendship, I remember, was the day that you went out and got a haircut for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic. And I just remember how excited you were for that. And it was a huge, huge step for you. And being in a mall and being that close to other people and having to deal with all of those things, but then to look at how big of a step that was just a few months ago, to then looking where you are now and how many things, like, you've just like blown past that set of obstacles. Like, you did it and then you blew through it and now you're moving on to other things. And sometimes I've seen it in our friendship, the small step that you give yourself, the proper pat on the back that seems small at the time, leads to
Mhm.
the bigger steps. And it can lead there a lot quicker than you think when it's happening. And that has been something that I've seen that I just wanted to make a note. So, what does a good day look like when it comes to symptoms?
Yeah, so a good day is kind of what you had just talked about. It's still preparing to go out in the world. Like my family, I have compromised immune system. So if we ever go out for a walk or a quick walk in the mall, we wear masks and hand sanitizer and, yada, 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 yada. So having a good day means that you can do all that and still come home and not be shattered. That's my word with my family I use when things are terrible. I say I'm shattered. And that's usually when my sister says off to bed and she points upstairs and I have to go and take a nap. So a good day is sometimes going out. And a lot of the times right now, a good day is going for a walk. Last summer, I was having very bad symptoms that I couldn't walk. My muscles wouldn't hold me up. So this summer, when I go have a good day, my favorite thing to do is to go for a walk. And sometimes, as Rick knows, it has started with 5 minutes, and I've worked my way up to half an hour. And that's not every day, but that for me is a huge good day. And I heard one of the person I interviewed, they said having a good day is just enjoying their life. And I think that is so amazing, because that truly is what it is when you're having a good day, you don't have to worry about where's the nearest bathroom if I have to throw up, or I can't move, I need to put ice. Having a good day is just walking around the house doing whatever you want, or putting the dishes away, or going for a walk and not having to worry so much about your body. So having a good day is kind of feeling not normal, but being able to just do things fully, to be in the moment and to be present. And I think too, when you're having good days, it's important having a support person who lives outside of your house. And we're kind of brought this up, is that when you live with someone or when you have chronic illness or disabilities, those small steps and those small accomplishments can be missed because you've had 4 really crappy days in a row. So that day before the crappy days, you forgot that you went for a 30-minute walk. And your whole family is kind of in protection caring mode because you need to get out of this so that you can eat and get strong. So to have someone like, for me, Rick, to be like, hey, last week you went for a 40-minute walk and then you still went and had tea after. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I did. That is huge. So having someone not like accountable towards you, but to be like, hey, this is the beginning of this year, you couldn't get out of bed for 2 weeks straight. You're like, oh, yeah. So having people, I think, to celebrate with you and to even point out, not all the time, like, hey, you did this, you can do this now. It's like, no, no, to just show that you've come so far, even if it's stepping outside the door and the next week stepping outside the driveway. That's huge. And to have someone outside of your normal living place to do that, I think is very helpful because it's easy to forget those little accomplishments. But yeah, having a good day for me is spending time with my family and going for walks right now.
That's great. I want to know, when you're talking about people on the outside, and for a lot of these people, this might be you. If people go through Sava Wellness, you're going to be sort of in that role. When I have had sort of a hard time knowing, and you're way more open than a lot of people, so I've been sort of lucky about this, but sometimes you don't want to address the chronic illness, not because you're upset by it, but you don't want it to define this person in your life.
Mhm.
But sometimes you just have to ask, how are you feeling today? Because it is important to ask it every once in a while. So I've tried to, for example, balance in my life. Like, I don't want Sarah to think I just view her as a chronic illness, but I also want to make sure that I'm not treating her like she doesn't have chronic illness, because if I'm doing that, I feel like I'm taking a huge part of who you are and not addressing it. And there might be some days that you're just not feeling great, and it's not going to affect anything other than maybe you'll be a little shorter, or maybe you'll, like you said, just like at one point, just have to check out for the day. How do you balance saying to somebody, how are you doing with your chronic illness, and not wanting to make that feel like it's the only thing you have to discuss with that person?
Mhm. I think that's a very good point because as someone with chronic illness, you don't want to talk about it all the time, but you don't want to not get asked because when you're not asked, it feels like people are tiptoeing around you, right? And then you feel like you have to tiptoe as well. And it's hard. Like you said, it doesn't define me, my chronic illness, but it does affect my life. Like it is who I am now because I've had to learn strategies and skills to deal with my symptoms. So I think my favorite question always is, how are you doing? It is a perfect question because if I want to talk about it, I can say, well, I'm actually having a really bad day. My pain is very high. Or if I'm having a bad day and I don't want to talk about it, I can say, oh, I'm doing okay. The sun is shining today. Right. So it's a very good question because it gives the power to the person with a chronic illness to answer how they want to answer. However, there's a lot of people who then won't talk about it at all. So I think if you're a friend and you really want to know what's going on, sometimes the direct question is just it's just the way you have to go. And if I ask one of my friends directly, I don't ask directly. Like I don't unless they've just had a procedure or something. I don't say how is your test results or how is your nausea today. I usually ask then if I say how you're doing and they don't answer anything about the chronic illness. I ask how are you feeling today? Because then again, if they really don't want to talk about it, they can say, I'm feeling okay, or I'm feeling a little down today, or I'm in a lot of pain. So there it gives you some wiggle room to ask some questions. I think you also do need to know the person because, as Rick knows, sometimes I don't talk about it because I don't always feel like people want to know. And that's because of some of my past relationships. So I'm working on that. So when Rick outright asked me, Sarah, how are you feeling today? How's your pain? I'm like, oh, okay. And I text you back and I tell you how I'm doing. So I think it depends. It depends on the person. I had another point.
I
Oh,
actually
yes.
just I don't want to interrupt you, and I'll let you get to your point. But I like the fact that this is a long conversation. Like, we're going a long time here, and I want to do that specifically for a number of reasons. Is one, I think this is an important topic, but two, and I don't want you to think I'm manipulating you, but I do know that when we talk for a long period of time, that every once in a while you're going to have a brain fog. And that's okay. Like, when we're talking on the travel podcast and we're talking about Disney, sometimes I'll edit out when you have a brain fog or something. But I feel like today, if you don't mind, I'm going to leave it in because I want people to see that when you're doing all of these things, and you have accomplished a number of things just in the short time that we have been friends. One of them is you have been on the podcast a lot more, and that takes energy to do that. That takes energy, and sometimes you have a brain fog, and I'm a perfectionist, so I will take it out of the episode. But I wanted to show, like, you can have a brain fog for 10 seconds, forget what you're talking about, but then just keep continuing to have a conversation. Like, it's not the end of the world when these things happen. So I kind of wanted to let those things exist and be a part of this conversation. So I hope I didn't then distract you to the point that you once again forgot what you.
No, but I do want to say for people who are perfectionists, I am one. So brain fog is hard. So sometimes I have notes in front of me or on my on paper when we're on the podcast and I can't remember the specific name of a ride. Either Rick will tell me and we'll edit it out, or I actually have maps and I have names of all the rides in front of me. So I just wanted to say that's not, it's not a failure that you need to have notes or that you need to have writing aids in front of you. I've just found that does help me, that when I know there's something we're talking about specifically and I have the information in front of me, it can really help. Um, so yeah, if you need to have help, and just tell your friends, or if you're on Zoom, like you can't tell what my hands are doing right now. I could have notes in front of me. I don't today, but sometimes I do, and you would have no idea. So just wanted to say that that's not a failure and that's a tip from me. But my point was, if you're talking to someone with chronic illness or disabilities, here is a secret. And Rick is going to be a little upset at me because I've done this to him a lot. If you say, I'm doing fine or I'm okay, that usually means they're not doing well. Because I'm okay is usually like I call it my crappy normal. That is like their crappy normal level. So sometimes it's good to check in to be like, are you really okay? Or what does okay mean? And you don't have to ask that every time. Sometimes just let it go and let them just pretend that you both think you're doing okay. But sometimes it's good to check in and be like, are you really okay? And I just wanted to share that because I know a lot of people in my life with chronic illness do that. So saying I'm okay usually means I'm surviving, or I'm borderline crappy, or I'm alive today. It can mean many different things.
And now, if everybody could just pause a moment while I go back and look at every conversation I have had with Sarah and look at all the times that I have failed her as a friend because I didn't follow up on that question. The very first time I had you on the podcast, and you said something that made me realize I wanted to keep having you on the podcast, because that first episode, we specifically talked about dealing with chronic illness when you are at the Walt Disney World theme parks. And you brought up something because I kept talking about how you put a positive spin on having chronic illness. And you do that. You used to be really active in the Disney bounding community, and you have had health issues that you worked around to create really great Disney bound. If somebody doesn't know what a Disney bound is, it's when you kind of dress in the style of a character without actually dressing up like the character. But I kept bringing up positivity. And you said, you're like, yes, I try to stay positive sometimes. But one of the things that made you upset about a lot of Instagram influencers who have chronic illness is that they made it look too easy, that they were always doing things. And it sometimes made you feel like a failure because you weren't as active as some of these people who were dealing with chronic illness, who were always out and about and always doing things and almost acting like they didn't have any issues. And when you said that, I thought, okay, this is a much more complicated situation than maybe I thought at first glance. But why don't you talk about that, about not being toxically positive?
Yeah, I think that's a really hard one on social media, especially because you want to look good, but you also, there's a fear of putting yourself out there that if you constantly tell people, I'm not feeling well, I'm sick, I'm ill, or showing things like I don't have one, but medical devices, right? Like things like that. Um, it can be very scary to put that out there. And let's be real, when you have chronic illness, making an Instagram post and either getting dressed up or making something on Canva or something like that, it takes a lot of energy. So when I'm having bad weeks, it takes a lot out of me to make sure I'm looking okay, because let's be real, everyone wants to look okay on their Instagram and social media, but it takes a lot of effort. And when you have chronic fatigue and a lot of different chronic illnesses, sometimes you just can't. A lot of the times I am lounging in sweatpants and a sweatshirt every day because I don't have energy to put on makeup or extra clothes. It's just the way it is. So to see people that are always positive about it, I kind of call it toxic positivity, because it almost, it disregards a lot of what you deal with. Because, well, everyone knows, even if you have a chronic illness or not all days are perfect. Not all days are rainbows and sunshines. Some days are hard. It just sometimes happens in chronic illness that you have more bad days than good. When I was having really tough time with my diagnosis, my family and I used to joke, and I used to laugh because it was funny, that we'd hope I'd have more than half of the year good days. And sometimes that didn't happen, right? So it's really hard to always promote the good parts of chronic illness, but it's also hard to promote the bad, because sometimes people aren't ready for that. It's easier to talk to people who have gone through terrible blood works and surgeries, to laugh about the blood that was gushing all over the place, because they understand. They know what it feels like to, I don't know, have something embarrassing happen in a doctor's office or something. But more generally, it's harder to talk about people, about what I always call it, like morbid humor, right? I remember telling a story about, I had to get blood work and you had to prick your finger, and my fingers were always cold. So I heated them up. My mistake. It went everywhere, the blood. So I'm telling the story. I'm laughing. My mom's laughing. My sister's laughing. And the people I told to are like, and I was like, oh, wait, is this not funny? Oh, right. So I think that's it's such a balance to not alienate people or make you feel like you're weird by telling this funny story, which you think is funny, but it is a huge part of your life when you have a lot of bad things happen. I don't know if that's what you're kind of getting at, but
Well, I just like that you are looking out for the people who actually have chronic illness. I think some of the people who, and I always addressed you at the very beginning as an Instagram influencer, because I feel like that is what you were doing at the time. You were an Instagram Disney influencer, and you would do these Disney bounds, and there were other people who maybe weren't trying to make other people with chronic illness feel better or feel seen, but they were trying to use their chronic illness to maybe get more likes, get more follows, where they were trying to make it seem like it was so easy to navigate this, so they weren't harshing anybody's buzz, and they could make people who didn't have chronic illness, that was their audience, people without chronic illness. And you are trying to make your audience people with chronic illness, to say, we can do things, but it's not easy. And I liked that it was a much more realistic look. And we've talked about this before, because I've done fundraisers for domestic violence, and I've made it perfectly clear that, like, I was in an abusive situation when I was a child. And we've had conversations where I will tell a story that I think is funny, like the one where you had with the blood is squirting out. And like, it's a genuinely funny story, but it's so macabre that you don't want to tell it to anybody. And then that was a fun thing, that when we became friends, I was like, okay, I got to tell you this story because you told the blood story. And I was like, every once in a while, you just need somebody who can joke about the bad things, who can say, like, when you joke about it, it's why Mel Brooks always made fun of Hitler in his movies. Like, when you make fun of it, you take away its power. And when you are able to, every once in a while, no, it's not a funny thing, it's not a joking thing, but when every once in a while you can make light of it, it really does take away the power to have the thing completely dominate your life. Is there anything that you would like people to know about your chronic illness or chronic illness in general that we didn't discuss? Because obviously, I can't think of everything as somebody who doesn't deal with this. So, what are some things that you want people to know?
I think the main one is that having chronic illness changes constantly. It can sometimes change week to week, sometimes day to day, and sometimes within an hour. And I know Rick and I have briefly touched on that, but like I've had days where I'm fine, 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 and then all of a sudden I get like literally smacked with fatigue and I have to go lay down. And I didn't know it was coming, and it just happens. And if I had had something that night, I would have had to cancel. So not only is this the most frustrating part for people with chronic illness, is that we, and especially planners, is that you can't plan. You can't plan for the flares to happen. You can't plan for the one symptom that went away years ago to come back. You just can't plan for it. So I think that is really important for everyone to know, people with chronic illness and the people that support them, is that it's variable, and they can't, like, I can do my best. If I have, say, a coffee chat with a friend tomorrow, I would rest all day today, and then I'd go tomorrow, and then I'd rest all day the next day, if I can. Sometimes you can't, sometimes that doesn't help, right? So it's just to know that it's not the person with chronic illness's fault if they cancel with you. They probably really wanted to come, but maybe they had a huge flare and now they can't come, or they have such a bad headache or something like that. So just the variability of chronic illness with the severity, but also the amount of symptoms can change, and it can change quite quickly. So that is important to know. And I think on top of that is that it's rare for people with chronic illness to be spontaneous. If you invite them to something, make sure you give them some heads up. Make sure you tell them all the information. Like if you just say, "Oh, come to a party," I will ask you 18,000 questions about it because I need to know, where is it? Is there a flight of stairs? Is there an elevator? If you have mobility aids, is there an access ramp? Like food, everything, what time. So just give them some more info so that they can have the ability to decide, but also to plan. Chronic illness is a lot about planning your life around it, planning to prevent it, planning to help when you do have a flare. So I think the variability in planning is very important. And also, we do have problems, we do have struggles, but we also want to live. We don't want to be laying on the couch all day. So calling people lazy, calling them that they don't want to work, that's probably most of the time not true. We want to work. We want to have a life. We want to get up off the couch. So, yeah, and all of the things you can, what my grandma used to say, stitch on a pillow, like if one door opens, a window opens, closes. Oh, if one door closes, a window opens, it doesn't help. It really doesn't. Like, we don't want to hear that this was for a reason. Even if it was, we don't want to hear it. I know we briefly talked about that. Um, so yeah, be honest with people, give them some extra care. Um, One of my interviewees said patience, and that's a huge one. Have patience. And yeah, just recognize that we're real people that want to live too.
So how can somebody get a hold of you, Sarah? I think you have definitely laid out a lot here. So how can somebody reach you at Sava Wellness?
My website is savawellness.ca, and that's where you can book with me and see all my socials. On Instagram and YouTube, I'm sava.wellness, and I'm also on Facebook at Sava Wellness. I'm most active on my Instagram, and my website's a great place to contact with me. So that's savawellness.ca.
And all this month, you have been doing an interview series. This is kind of reversing that, but you have been talking to people all this month. So why don't you tell people how they can get those interviews?
Yeah, this month we talked about is chronic disease, chronic illness, and disability Pride Month. So I've put together a set of interviews so that we can get a broader perspective on different chronic illnesses that aren't just mine. So those are posted on my website under the community tab, so you can look at them through there. I have posted links on all my socials, and the full videos are on YouTube as well as on my website.
Sarah, I am so happy that we had the chance to have this conversation on the show. You interviewed my wife, Courtney, earlier in the month. She is one of the interviews that is up there. And um, just to have two of the most important people in my life dealing with this has been, obviously I don't want to say it's a blessing, but the fact that when I'm talking with Sarah, I'm learning things about chronic illness that I use when I'm with Courtney, and seeing Courtney navigate the theme parks, for example, with chronic illness. The good Lord willing, there's going to be a time where Sarah and I are at the theme parks and I can be like, okay, like now I sort of understand how some of these things go. And it was really, really important to me to take a break from the theme parks and talk about something maybe a little bit more serious, because we're always trying to find ways to take these things that we love, these fun side things that make life happy, and use them to try to spread positivity. And I don't mean toxic positivity, but to spread awareness. We raised the money to collect basketballs and volleyballs earlier this year for Boys and Girls Club. I worked with trying to promote Alicia Stella's fundraiser for the Trevor Project. Last year, I walked across Ireland to raise money for domestic violence. We're always trying to find a way to help people through the fun, because fun is great, fun is awesome, but there are people who are struggling and there are people who need help or maybe just need a platform. And I'm so happy to be able to share your story with people. Um, and you are, I'm just going to get a little mushy for a second, like one of the best people in the history of the world. And I don't know what I would have done if I didn't reach out to you on Instagram and ask you to be on the podcast. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Rick.